It's been a decade since the 2013 Heat won a championship. A team loaded with talent, but one that also played a then unconventional brand of basketball that ushered in a new era of small ball. Through the exhilarating highs and the near brutal lows, the 2013 Heat was a team for the history books, one of the best teams of the century, and one whose championship solidified LeBron's place as a Pantheon caliber legend. Hey guys, this is Cyber TV here, but you can call me Cyber or Kevin. For this video, I wanted to take a trip down memory lane to a team that I'm really struggling to comprehend existed a decade ago. A fucking decade ago. I felt that this was a great time to discuss this team, how the regular season and postseason went, and what impact it has had on the current NBA landscape. But before delving into all of that, I want to discuss how the 2013 Heat was even formed, the few major events that occurred in the previous 3 years that allowed this team to dominate and leave its mark in NBA lore. Let's take a trip back to 2010, a few months before LeBron joined Miami, when he was the chosen one. While being known as King James is a fitting name nowadays, he's easily the most accomplished active player. You could argue it was premature to call him that back then, as he wasn't even the most accomplished player on his own team in 2010, the big Aristotle was. Regardless, LeBron dominated in the regular season and was able to run away with his second MVP award. The Cavs had the best record in the league and were able to basically rest the last few games of the season. They dominated against the 41-41 Bulls in the first round, but against a 50-win Celtics team, which granted one that at full strength played more like a 60-win squad, but one that was still aging and still didn't have home court advantage, the Cavaliers blew a 2-1 lead and lost the series in 6 games. The narrative is that LeBron had no help, but that's a myth that we'll dispute for another time. LeBron responded to a 2-1 collapse by going on ESPN and making his infamous decision to join the Miami Heat, a team that won only 47 games the previous season, but included a top 3 player in the league in Dwayne Wade, as well as the addition of Chris Bosh, who was probably a top 15 player during that time. In the 2010 offseason, the Heat also added veterans like Big Z from the Cavaliers, so one of LeBron's longtime teammates, and Mike Bibby. And based on the pre-championship celebration,
not one championships.
Not two.
LeBron, tell us about that.
Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7. Hey.
it appears that LeBron was expecting a cakewalk comparable to his 2007 Eastern Conference playoff run. But instead, there were some growing pains as the 2011 Heat started the season off 9-8, and he even had a 5-game losing streak right after the All-Star break. But things began to click by the end of the regular season when the Heat finished with a 58-24 record and were statistically the best team in the regular season according to SRS. They dominated for most of the postseason until the finals. We know how that went. 2012 was a different season for LeBron and the Heat. They weren't quite as dominant in the regular season, although not because of LeBron, who had a better regular season than he did in his first year in Miami, a season that earned him his 3rd MVP in 4 seasons. At this point, we all knew he was one of the greatest players ever, just off of the regular season alone. But the lack of a ring was a huge hole in his legacy, and he was determined to fix that. I want to eventually make a video on 2012 LeBron because I truly believe that was his peak as a basketball player, and it doesn't seem like enough people agree with that, so I'll give my case on that season whenever I can. But anyway, so now LeBron's a champion. He had perhaps his finest ever postseason, and at 27 he was at his peak. Was it possible for him to enter another gear? Spoiler alert, it was, at least in the regular season. In the 2012 offseason, the Godfather Pat Riley acquired veterans Rashard Lewis and Ray Allen, both former All-Star caliber players who could hit the long ball, while neither player was in their prime. On a team with 3 future Hall of Famers in their primes, having veterans like those two accepting a reduced role was huge. Despite all of that, the 2013 Heat did not start the way you would think a 6-6-16 team would have. While they never looked vulnerable, they were elite throughout the season. For most of the first half, they looked more like a 55-61 squad, which was great of course, but not what people were expecting from a team with this much talent and with LeBron at his peak. During the stretch, LeBron was averaging 25.2 points, 8.5 boards, 6.8 assists, and had a true shooting percentage of 60.5 for a team that was on pace to win 61 games. But by the halfway point of the season, the Heat were 28-13, which was on pace for a 56-26 season, and just lost a double overtime game to a washed Celtics team. LeBron's play rose during that span, and in general, I remember him being a force on both ends of the season, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But at the halfway point, the Heat, despite all their talent and veteran presence, looked like they were no better than the fourth best team in the entire league. The Thunder, the Clippers, and the Spurs had better records up that point, and all three looked like they were on pace to win at least 60 games. It wasn't like the East was anything special that season either. The Heat looked like a disappointment, and no one was really scared of them despite being the defending champions. But then things began to change on February 13 against the Raptors. Having just gotten blown out by the Pacers 2 nights earlier, no one thought much of this game at the time. I mean, the Raptors ended up winning just 34 games, but it was the start of something great, something historically great, something that had not been achieved since the early 70s when the legendary 1972 Lakers achieved the record that we might never see topped again. The Raptors' win was the first of what would have becoming 27 consecutive wins for the Heat, and breaking it down only further reinforces how great of an achievement this was. The Heat faced 12 playoff teams during the span, including 5 that won at least 49 games, and destroyed their opponents by a margin of 11.9, which in a full season would rank 4th all time behind the 72 Lakers, 71 Bucks, and 96 Bulls. LeBron was magnificent during this run, averaging 27 points, 8.1 boards, 8 assists on a blistering 65.8 true shooting percentage while playing all defense caliber defense. With him on the floor, the Heat were a plus 12.7. During the stretch, we saw some of LeBron's best individual performances, such as the game against the Bobcats, where he scored 31 points on 13 of 14 shooting. That's right, he only missed one shot that entire game. Or the double overtime Kings game, where he scored his season high in points with 40, but he also dished out 16 assists. Neither team was anything special that year, but even against upper echelon competition, LeBron scored 30 on 9 of 11 shooting against the Clippers in what was a blowout. And versus the Thunder, LeBron had a fantastic all-around performance with a 39, 12, and 7 stat line, and what would have become a double-digit win. This was peak LeBron, a 6'9", 250 to 208 pounds force on both ends who could score at Shaq-like efficiency and guard multiple positions at a high level. At a time where most of the top players were not at their peak, Kobe was 34 and no longer a two-way force, and Durant was 23 and still developing, LeBron was pretty clearly the best player in the league, having one of the best all-around seasons we'll ever see. I'd also like to point out that it's not a coincidence to me that the addition of Chris Aronson, aka Birdman, who joined the Heat right before the win streak began, was also a big contributor to their 27-game win streak. Birdman's entire game revolved around playing off-ball and hustling, which was ideal for a Heat team that needed both from its known stars. But anyway, the Heat win 29-14 to 56-14, which really emphasized how crazy the streak was, as the Heat nearly doubled their win total without losing a single game. The Heat even pulled off the Harlem Shake in the middle of their streak. For a few months, they looked invincible, but it all came crashing down on March 27 when they lost to the Derrick Rose-led Bulls 101-97. It was bound to happen, but I'm sure the Heat were aiming for 34 wins, which would have been the record had they achieved it. They were 7 wins away, but it was just not meant to be. The Heat finished the season with easily the best record. LeBron finished the season averaging 26.8 points, 8 boards, and 7.3 dimes on 64 true shooting percentage. Numbers that look excellent today, but for that era was outstanding. Among players that qualified, he finished 4th in points per game, 21st in rebounds per game, 11th in assists and steals per game, 36 in blocks per game, and while I don't like advanced stats at all, he also blew everyone away in every metric out there and was the clear best player on the best team. He also only averaged 3 turnovers per game, which is pretty insane given his usage and playmaking role. Despite what should have been an obvious unanimous MVP, he missed that achievement by one vote, as Gary Washburn of the Boston Globe voted Melo for some reason, which is a shame because he deserved an unanimous MVP as no one else had an argument that season. He also finished second in Defense Player of the Year to Marc Gasol. Many believe he was robbed, but I believe Gasol deserved it more as a big man anchoring an elite Grizzlies defense. In real time, most people were fine with Gasol winning it. Regardless, he had a complete season, and with a championship already in his possession, it would have been easy for championship number 2 to occur. After all, his biggest competition was either going to be an injured Thunder team or an aging Spurs team. Well, not quite. The Heat had little issues defeating an overly confident Bucks team.
6. We're gonna win the 6.
And only needed 5 games to eliminate the Derrick Rose-led Bulls. But they started to look very vulnerable after those series. The Pacers were a very good team. They had a 3.34 SRS, which was 9th in the league. They had the best defensive rating in the entire association. They were led by Paul George, who had a breakout season, averaging these numbers, while being one of the best defenders in the league. They also had Roy Hibbert, who was as good, if not better, than George, and for this specific series was the clear difference maker for the Pacers. His massive frame in a time when the paint was somewhat clogged and verticality was still allowed made him a matchup nightmare for the undersized Heat. Hibbert versus the Hawks and Knicks, both teams starting true center first, averaged just 14 points on 47%. But against the Heat, where a natural power forward in the Bosch was often playing center, Hibbert averaged 22.1 points on 56% shooting, essentially producing like mid-2000s Shaq. And he made a difference on the defense side of the court as well with his massive frame, and the Pacers' overall gritty defense having everyone, including LeBron, shoot at lower percentages than the regular season. Of course, LeBron still averaged 29.75 on 61 true shooting percentage, which, considering the defense he faced, and the Pacers threw everything at him. They were even guarding from deep like he was Steph. He played amazing against them. But I do wonder how this Heat team would have fared against bigger teams than past, because how close this and the following series went. I also wonder how different the series goes if Hibbert wasn't subbed out on the final play of Game 1, when LeBron made a huge clutch layup to win the game. Hibbert there makes a huge difference, no? Anyway, in a little back and forth, the Heat ultimately prevailed, blowing the Pacers down in Game 7. It was time for the NBA Finals against an old foe for LeBron, the San Antonio Spurs, arguably the greatest franchise since Jordan's Bulls. The Spurs were a perennial 50-win squad for most of the century, and the 13 Spurs were no exception. That being said, this was among the weaker Spurs team of that era. Tony Parker was probably the only player, at least among the stars, that was in his prime, and honestly, they were very lucky to even reach the finals, as the Thunder, historically a bad matchup for the Spurs, lost Westbrook, and the Lakers, who had the Spurs' biggest kryptonite, lost that kryptonite before the playoffs even began. And yes, I know the odds were not in their favor, but Kobe had a great track record against the Spurs in the playoffs, which cannot be said about LeBron. LeBron initially struggled despite being there to shoot wide open jumpers, averaging 16.7 points on 44.1 true shooting percentage in the first 3 games of the finals. A bizarre finals where Danny Green once looked like the favorite to win finals MVP. A finals where Tim Duncan looked like his 2003 self for one half of Game 6. And a finals that gets finally remembered due to a legendary Game 6, but was otherwise a series full of blowouts and a very anticlimactic Game 7. I thought it was better than the 2016 finals, but I'll take the 2010 finals and maybe even the 2005 finals over either. Anyway, LeBron was dominant the rest of the series. He averaged 31.8 points, 9.8 rebounds, 6.8 assists, and even 2.8 steals on 57.5 true shooting percentage from games 4 to 7. And he saved his best for last, scoring 37 on 12-23 shooting and going 5 out of 10 from threes and a perfect 8 of 8 from the line. He was easily the best player in the league that season and finally played like it in his most important games. But one can't help but wonder how different his legacy would be perceived had this sequence not happened off of a LeBron brick, and also how this Heat team would be perceived. As was the case with the conference finals, the subbing out of Tim Duncan, the true center for the Spurs, likely contributed to his sequence being possible, and for me it just proves more reasons to question this team's dominance in other more big-man-oriented seasons. One benefit that LeBron had for most of his peak was the dearth of elite big-man play. The game historically has been ruled by bigs, and that was still the case early in LeBron's career with Shaq, Duncan, Garnett, and Dirk being 4 of the 5 or 6 best players in the league in the mid-2000s. And for what it's worth, LeBron has a 2-5 postseason record against him, and is 2-6, including Dwight, who was a dominant center early in LeBron's prime. But then the big man position fell off a cliff as those 2000s legends entered their twilight years, and the likes of Yao Ming, Greg Oden, Andrew Bynum, and even Dwight Howard weren't able to fulfill their potential due to injuries. Many believe that the game was simply moving away from the dominant big, and for nearly a decade it looked like that was true, as the best teams were generally led by perimeter players. But the past few years, we've seen the MVP race boil down to the dominant big man of this era, so clearly the issue wasn't that the game moved away from them, it's that there just was a talent drought inside that's finally been filled up with bigs like Giannis, Jokic, Embiid, Davis, and then other elite bigs like Anthony Towns, Gobert, Bam, and many more. I mean, go look at NBA rosters from about 2013 up until about 2018, and you'll see a huge drop-off in interior talent, that was not prevailing before 2013 or the past few years. With all that being said, I think the 2013 Heat deserve a lot of praise as a dominant team that won 27 consecutive games, and also as a team that helped further popularize small ball and spacing the floor out, concepts that were utilized far less in those days. But on the flip side, I also see a team that formed at the right place and at the right time, and yet still nearly botched it twice. It's not uncommon for all-time great teams to go 7, even twice. The 1988 Lakers and 2008 Celtics both had at least 2 series that went 7 games. The Heat team I saw was a team that struggled with size, and even today's game, size still matters. Teams are not as big as they used to be, at least in the interior, but length and mobility has been more emphasized in today's game, and as mentioned earlier, there's a lot of quality bigs playing today that was not as prevalent 10 years ago. If Hibbert and at past his prime Duncan gave the Heat issues, I have a hard time seeing them win against the Nuggets or the Bucks. I definitely have a hard time seeing them beat any of the 2000 Spurs and Lakers teams that featured big lineups and or dominant bigs in Shaq or Duncan. Am I simply looking too much into those 2 7-game series? Perhaps, but that's why I'm not as high on this team historically as many others are. But I'll close this video out by asking a few questions. Was 2013 LeBron's best season? Are the 2013 Heat a top 10 team ever? How would they fare in a more big-man-oriented era? Anyway, thanks to anyone that made it this far. Leave a like and sub as it'll help the algorithm out and also help grow my channel out. So, until next time, take care.